Hi, everybody. Thank you very much, organizer, for inviting. It's a great pleasure to be here. So my name is Alexei Poliakov. I'm a co-founder of Lokomizer. It's an early-stage startup from London. Before founding Lokomizer, I used to be a scientist. I used to study spatial behavior and life system at the level of cells. And you'll see how it's connected to Lokomizer story later on during the talk. So today I'm going to tell you about what we do at Lokomizer and what I think could be interesting to a broader geospatial community. What we are doing is we look at billions of geolocated points linked to users, which is scattered across different verticals. It could be geodata from smartphones, mobile applications, mobile search, social media geotag, like geotag tweets, for example, data from mobile telecoms. And we take a closer look at what all these individual histories, which create a great opportunity for understanding the next generation of consumers. So we're looking at the insights which are hidden behind this raw, lat long and timestamps. But the thing is, currently, the big flaw in our understanding of location data and how we interpret all this spatial information linked to humans. I mean, just to give you a few examples of what can go wrong when you take the current very primitive way of looking at things. For example, if you look at these pictures, green pinpoints at points where users spend the time, and it's eating, drinking places, and the red, it's cinemas. So it's all in London. For example, if you look at this middle picture, so what currently marketers, for example, do, they collect all cinema lovers only around the cinemas. So you can see that in this particular case, if the user, for example, spend the time in eating, drinking places around the cinema at some distance, and never showed up in the cinema on a smartphone, so it means this person will be eliminated from the analysis. So he won't be considered as a cinema lover. But what if this person never opened the smartphone in the cinema for some reason, but then after or before the cinema he goes to eat or drink coffee at some places? And also, if you look at this picture, for example, if you go to the cinema and you will be in this box, why? It could be that you're actually not a cinema lover in the first place because you're simply close to the cinemas because they're eating, drinking places which you prefer close to them. And again, the third picture shows that we don't really take into account how the places are distributed around in space. For example, here, so if you visit all places in the small area which are just eating, drinking, nothing around, so you'll be probably the same eating, drinking lover as this one, but there's a clear difference which shows that you are more interested in eating, drinking than here. So all this shows that the really simplistic view on the location behavior of consumers, which in the first place, in the first instance, is really rational. So we consider this as a rational approach to location. But in reality, we think that what we have on the map and how we look at the location points on the map, it really reflects the world we see. But in fact, so each of us, they have a different perception of what is on the map. And just to give you a few examples how it could potentially look like, there's some tests which scientists do on spatial perception. And one of the tests is just to understand how people look at global versus local, or forest for the trees. So if you look at this picture, then you ask to find out which one is most similar, this one or this one. So the people with a global perception, they will choose this one because the global order of things is similar between this and this one. But people with more local perception, they will choose this one because the small details are similar, even though the global order is different. Going further, for example, another a set of experiments scientists do. They look at how you perceive the space based on the context. So you can see that this ball and this ball, they perceive differently because the context around this and this is changed. So it shows, and it confirmed by scientific data, that what we see in our heads is not what we have on the map. And the same is true for the distances. The distances which you perceive in space and time, they also depend on your emotions and your motivational status and so on. So, so you can see that there's some kind of paradox. So currently what we do with the location data, we look at it from the rational perspective, from the kind of map-based, which is common for everybody. But then we make a decision on an assumption of human behavior based on that. But the thing is, it's a proven fact that the perception is not, and the distortion of space is not that great when the person is unmotivated, when the spatial object or places are irrelevant to a person, or a person isn't happy. So the thing is that all the marketers at the moment, they are profiling people based on this assumption that we are not motivated, we are not, everything around us is not non-relevant. So, so sure, there must be a solution. There must be a solution, and the solution probably lies in our brain. How the brain that understands the space and how it transforms the spatial data into relevant and personalized pictures. So there must be a map somehow. And thankfully, in 2014, there was a Nobel Prize for its so-called GPS system in the brain, where the scientists found the region, really like an ancient part of the brain, Antonine cortex, where the spatial signals are transformed in some kind of a map. But in reality, we found out that there's no actually a map. There's no map in the brain which we can say that this is a representation of a personal spatial experiences. So on the right, it's actually what we have. This is what our brain collects about space and time. So it's hexagonal pattern of firing where neurons fire. If you, for example, imagine this is a room, so or a square. So when you'll be walking around, so the firing will have a precise order. And the space between this firing and the arrangement between them will depend on geography and on your experience. So if nothing is relevant for you, so it will be, for example, this representation. But if something is more relevant to you, and so there will be distortion in this map. So it's not one-to-one correspondence. So there must be some kind of a code which translates all the spatial data we have on the map into what we have in the brain, how we store it and memorize and then use for for making the next move. So how we make sense of all of this understanding that analytics behind spatial data is wrong, and actually the brain doesn't give us the clear answer. So we look at this, some insights which you can get from nature, and more specifically, for example, from cell behavior. So these are just a few examples of several types of cells which we found in our bodies, which just move freely on a dish. So you can see different cell types move differently. They have different speed, they have a different persistence. Some of them just move more randomly, some of them just really champions. They don't turn sideways. So, but you can say that this is just a movement of one cell, and I can say that they're moving. That there's no map here. They don't have representation of space, surely. But the thing is, what's interesting when you try to look at, for example, the development of organisms. So these cell types, they form really nice and organized patterns. For example, this is the embryo of zebrafish, and you can see the stripy pattern in the hindbrain. So if you take closer look, you'll see this really segregated, two types of segregated tissues, green and red, so they'll never mix. The thing is, if you take these cells together and mix them randomly, so what you'll see, what will happen in a dish with time, that these cells, even though you force them to mix together, they finally get away from each other. They segregate. But surely there's no instructions. You can't find instruction in, sorry about that. You can't find instruction in an organism which gives, for example, green cells. It tells green cells go away from red one, and vice versa. So, but for some reason, even without the map, this pattern can be formed nicely and precisely. So we think that we found a solution of how the cells actually find a way in space and time without the map, using some statistical physical approaches, for example, taken from phase transitions, where all location data is actually not looked at the perspective of the distances, but it looks at the perspective of affinities, so or interaction. So the cells form actually the precise patterns because they have some intrinsic mechanism to detect the affinities between themselves and environment. So we take this advantage in our platform, which Lokomizer built, and we translate it to the humans. And so what we do as a business, so we take location data, which I've described before on people, and create the interest profile which describe affinities of a user to different locations. So it's not distances, it's actually the affinities or attraction scores which link us to different environmental factors. What we do also next, we aggregate these profiles and create the place profiles, which will tell you how they work. So in a nutshell, we create the 360 degrees view of a customers based on how a customer is connected to the environmental cues. So coming back to these three pictures, so if you look, for example, again in the center one, so even though if you, based on our algorithm of translating location data into the affinity scores, so even if you are a visitor of eating, drinking places, you'll get the interest score to eating, drinking, but you also get some affinity to the cinema, so we can capture this. And also, if you are, for example, visiting the cinema places, so you'll have a strong interest to entertainment and cinema, but you also get interest to the eating, drinking, which will show in your profiles, even though you'll never visited them. And again, if you look at the pattern distribution of relative distribution of the same places, jumping. So you can see here that eating, drinking in this case will be much stronger than, for example, in this case, because all eating places you visit, they are clumped together. So what we can do also with our algorithm, we can estimate how different interests by broadness can be look like. For example, if you have a broad interest and look at the shopping, for example, high street fashion shopping, so you'll see that if you go further within the range, so you won't change the amount of people with a shopping interest, which tells that the shopping is kind of a broad range interest. If you look at a more niche interest, like a nightlife, for example, a Calvin Klein audience, you'll see a small proportion of people will have a short range, but then when we try to look further and going from local to global, so you'll increase this range. And again, what we can also do with our algorithm, when we look at the profiles, we can really select the profiles with the strongest interest from this distribution. So really concentrate our efforts on the more receptive audience. Just to give you one use case before I finish about what we do with data when we can aggregate this. So, for example, if you want to find out the target audience which drink after work and young audience, so what we'll do. So we'll look at the affinities of users to a drinking location after work, and we'll be looking where these users with this affinity spend the time during the day. So this is how the results will look like with the hotspots of where we can find the target audience outside of eating drinking hours. So this is a small demo. We have a polygon, 500 by 400 polygons in London, and this demo for out-of-home campaign which we are currently planning. So this is a kind of a planning tool for this campaign. So if you concentrate, for example, on this square, and if you want to find out what is the audience in this square in terms of the eating, drinking, this is this affinity score, general affinity score of the audience. So you can see if during the whole day we have kind of 15 points, but then if you break down into time intervals, so you can see during the working hours it's 15, it's more or less non-changed, but then you can go further and try to understand the affinity of this place to eating, drinking during the out-of-work hours. You can see that the intensity is changed and the affinity grows. And you can also look at the nighttime. For example, the people who live in this area, and what is the affinity of these users toward eating, drinking places. So then, based on this map, you can clearly identify the locations where you can find the people with the right affinity, even though where there's no, if, for example, eating and drinking places whatsoever, like this square, for example. There's no eating, drinking, but the concentration of eaters and drinkers, they're really, really high. So the expected outcome of our technology is that we can identify absolutely non-obvious places where the desired audiences can spend their time. We can increase the foot traffic and create the uplifts for the brands when they target them using different targeting methods. And moreover, we make everybody happy because the customers won't be targeted, bombarded by non-relevant messages because simply they are somewhere close and without any connection to the place. Just to give one example, before we finish, we just recently ran a campaign for Jameson's Whiskey Lovers. And one of the really unexpected results, which we didn't expect at all. So we found a few location spots on the Oxford campus where there are no pubs or bars whatsoever, even within miles. But actually, these spots show that the people in this area have affinity to Jameson's bars generally. So, coming back to the title, how this is related to the Minority Report in 1 and 2. Oh, sorry, this is the wrong one. So the Minority Report 1 is, as you remember, I'm sure you saw this film, that when being walking around the environment, so we'll be always exposed to something which is relevant to our behavioral traits. But I mean, this is already happening, and this is especially, I mean, what kind of maps I just showed you, they could be adjusted in real time, and you will be really shown something which reflects your behavioral traits. But what is Minority Report 2? Is with all this knowledge about how our brain transforms the environmental data into the brain activity, which could really help us not just to match the offers, for example, recommendations to what we are, but to change it. And again, this is about to happen as well. Like, for example, the application of changing consumer behavior and like sponsored journeys, like, for example, Uber Zero, if you know, they force you to change your behavior when there is some offer in place. So this is what we will be looking next, Minority Report 2, and hopefully we will be able to talk about this very soon. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to answer all the questions now or later on. So I'm about until the end. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Alexei. I think it's a nice blend between biology and location intelligence. Really cool. Can hardly believe there are no questions, so who has one? Everybody, biology, A graders here, so everybody understands it?
Thank you very much for this interesting talk. It reminds me to some classes at our university. We're talking about geographic information science and spatial thinking. But I was wondering how you make business out of that. So who would be typical customers who would pay for whatever you showed us right now?
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. Our main customers currently is in advertising and marketing. So out-of-home advertising, for example, they do planning based on our insight on the place. So if, for example, they want to find eating drinkers during the day, they can use place posters based on our heat maps. And also mobile advertising, they can target consumers based on our profiles. So whenever they saw somebody on the system, they open application and then they connect to our platform with the profiles and then say that this user has got interest to luxury location and interest to shoe shopping, so that they can send the relevant message in real time.